Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12 English First Additional Language. Today we are continuing with the series of Macbeth lessons and we are going to start with Act 3. Again, we're going to discuss every scene in detail, so please have your Macbeth book and your notes with you that you can follow and add notes as I'm explaining. So it's a beautiful day to learn something new. So here we go. First of all, we're going to start with a summary of the scene again, Act 3, Scene 1. In a soliloquy, Banquo expresses his suspicions that Macbeth has not gained the throne by fair means. He hopes that the prophecies made to him by the witches will also be fulfilled. Macbeth and his wife, accompanied by members of the court, enter as king and queen. Macbeth invites Banquo and Fleance to a banquet that night where Banquo will be the guest of honor. But he has already plotted Banquo's murder. While waiting for the murderers, he gives the reasons why he fears Banquo. Not only does he fear Banquo's inborn nobility and moral integrity, but is also disturbed by the witch's prophecy that Banquo's descendants will rule Scotland. He arranges with the murderers to kill not only Banquo but his son Fleance too as they return to the castle for the banquet that night. Right, the setting, we start at Forres. Macbeth is now king and he lives in the royal palace at Forres. And Banquo enters. And as I said, there is a soliloquy where Banquo reflects that the witches' predictions have come true for Macbeth, but he suspects Macbeth has used evil methods to attain his goal. In other words, he murdered Duncan because he says it now. Thou has it now. King, Cawdor, Glamis, all as the weird woman promised. So everything that was promised by the witches, but look at the reverse order of the titles. And the weird woman, again, another question, another name for the witches. And I fear thou playest most foully for it. Right, so he has used evil methods to attain his goal. And then he goes on, he says, yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. So he's saying the crown would not remain in Macbeth's family. The witches said that he, Banquo, would be the father of many kings to come. And that emphasized the sterility, the emptiness of Macbeth's kingship. And then he goes on and he says, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine, why, by the verities of thee made good. And then he goes on, he hopes that as all the prophecies have come true regarding Macbeth, that their predictions, the witches' predictions of his future, might also be realized, that he will father future kings. May they not be my oracles as well and set me up in hope, but hush, no more. So the oracles is the prophecies foretelling his future. So Banquo here broods on the meeting with the witches and what they predicted for him. He's not completely immune to the prophecies they have made to him, but he is able to overcome temptation. Big difference between him and Macbeth. He's not prepared to do something evil to make the prophecies come true. Right, the Senate sounded, there's a flourish of trumpets to announce the king's arrival. Enter Macbeth as king and Lady Macbeth as queen, but we will see both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are completely disillusioned and unhappy. Being king and queen is not as great as they thought it would be. Now, Macbeth's crown has not brought him the expected joy. He is suspicious of and afraid of Banquo, and he displays his hypocrisy. He plays the role of a gracious host, just like he did the night of Duncan's murder, he says, here's our chief guest, here's our guest of honor, as planned state at the planned state banquet. So the theme of appearance versus reality is evident here. And Lady Macbeth goes on and she says, well, if we have left him out, it would be completely inappropriate and the feast would be incomplete. And then Macbeth addresses Banquo. Tonight we hold a solemn supper, a formal state banquet, and I'll request your presence. So it's more of a command than a request. And then in the way that Banquo answers him, let your highness command upon me, to the which my duties are with a most. And then he says, Banquo plays the role here of the royal subject. He plays the role just as Macbeth plays the role of the gracious host. So he's formal and polite to his new king. They are no longer friends and comrades like they were on the battlefield. Okay, and then Macbeth asks him a question. Ride you this afternoon? So he subtly asks questions to determine Banquo's exact movements so that he can know where to place the murderers. He's continuing, he says, yes, my good lord, I'm going riding. And then he pretends that he wanted to ask Banquo's wise advice in an important state matter, but he would now wait until the following day. Take note, he explicitly used the word tomorrow, but will take tomorrow. So he is working on his alibi for Banquo's murder. He deliberately refers to the conversation that they will have the next day so that nobody will suspect him of the murder. And then he's asking, how far will you ride? And then Banquo just answers, as far as it will fill the time between now and supper time. And then maybe he will use 1 or 2 hours of darkness to finish his ride, and that is perfect for the murder. And then Macbeth says, fail not our feast. So don't miss the banquet. And Banquo said, my lord, I will not. He promises that he will not. And ironically, Macbeth's imagination will find him there as a ghost. It is this imaginary appearance of Banquo's ghost that makes Macbeth betray himself. It will be the start of his eventual downfall. Banquo failed to expose Macbeth in life, but now in death, he succeeded in doing what he should have done after Duncan's murder. And then Macbeth goes on, and on this slide, he is discussing Malcolm and Donalbain. He says, we hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and Ireland. So Malcolm and Donalbain is referring to as bloody because he wants people to believe that they were responsible for Duncan's murder. Okay, and they are bestowed in England and Ireland. So they are living in England and in Ireland respectively, not confessing their cruel patricide, not confessing to killing their father. Remember, patricide means to kill your own father. Filling their hearers with strange invention. So they are obviously openly talking about their suspicions that Macbeth is responsible for the murder of Duncan. And Macbeth obviously makes it off as lies. And again, but of that tomorrow. Again, he used the word tomorrow to establish his alibi. So he says, we will talk about that tomorrow, together with important state business that demands the attention of us both. So he is still busy creating an alibi for Banquo's murder. And then he says, hurry to your horse now. He bids his last farewell to Banquo till he returns that night for the feast. And then Macbeth firmly believes that Banquo will be dead by then and not show up at the feast. He did not foresee that Banquo would appear as a ghost that only he could see. And then goes Fleance with you. It is the apparent afterthought, but in effect it's one of the most important questions which Macbeth requires an answer to. Even if Banquo were removed and thus be prevented from having more children, his son Fleance could start the line of kings prophesied by the witches. So only if Fleance were also eliminated could Macbeth really feel completely safe. And then Banquo answers him, Fleance is going with him, it's time for us to go, we should be going now. And Macbeth wishes them a safe and speedy ride, and Banquo exit. And then Macbeth says something very interesting. Let every man be master of his time till 7 at night. To make society the sweeter welcome, we will keep ourselves till supper time alone. While then, God be with you. So it's interesting to see how Macbeth and his wife are drifting apart. He dismisses the court, including Lady Macbeth, telling them to occupy themselves by doing whatever they wish until supper. But he actually wants to be alone to meet with the murderers. He's saying he wants to be alone, but it's not true. He wants to meet with the murderers. And then everybody leaves except for Macbeth and a servant. And then he says, Sarah, a word with you. I want to talk to you. So he's probably talking to Satan, his servant, who is his armor bearer and closest confidant. You'll see later in the play we have to do with him again. And then he's asking, are those men waiting for me to see them? And then he says, yes, they are waiting for you outside the gate. So now while waiting, he sends now the servant to go and get them. And then while waiting for the murderers to be brought in, Macbeth reveals his secret thoughts of insecurity and fear in another heartfelt soliloquy. Okay, just a question that was in a previous paper. What do we learn about the character of Banquo? Now, what we read in the previous part of this scene and what we will read in the next slide of this scene will tell you. So Banquo is suspicious of Macbeth. Remember, if it's a character question and it's only for 1 mark, you only need to write down the character trait. If it's for 2 marks, you have to give a motivation. The character trait, 1 mark, the motivation, the 2nd mark. Banquo has even more reason to be suspicious or distrustful, as he was present when the witches predicted Macbeth's future. Banquo claims to be an honorable and principled man, but he does not take a stand against Macbeth like Macduff does. Now, this is where Macbeth starts with his soliloquy. He first of all sends the servant to go and get the murderers with whom he has a meeting that afternoon, and then he starts, to be thus is nothing but to be safely thus. So to be king is nothing unless one is safe and secure in the position, unless you're confident about remaining king. Remember, Macbeth is the king now, so he refers to himself in the plural form when he says, our fears in Banquo stick deep. So Macbeth's insecurity is caused by Banquo. His fears of Banquo are deeply fixed. They hurt like thorns or daggers in the flesh. It makes him feel exposed and vulnerable. And he goes on and he says, and in his royalty of nature, talking about Banquo, reigns that which would be feared. So Banquo's inborn nobility of character inspires fear and respect in Macbeth. He fears Banquo's natural fitness to be king. He feels inferior to Banquo. Macbeth lost all the virtues a king should have, and Banquo has all those virtues. Right, he goes on, he says he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valor to act in safety. So he says Banquo is extremely brave, but his courage or bravery is guided by reason. which enables him to act wisely and discreetly without endangering himself. He says he has excellent judgment, he's loyal and has integrity. He stands in direct contrast to Macbeth, who was unable to control his own ambition. It made him act against his better judgment. And then he goes on, there is none but he whose being I do fear, and under him my genius is rebuked, as it is said. So he feels restricted by Banquo. Macbeth's guardian angel is defeated by Banquo. It's stronger than his. So this soliloquy gives a fine characterization of Banquo, the previous question that we answered, and shows why Macbeth is afraid of him. It shows how dissatisfied Macbeth is with being king. And finally, it reveals the distinct deterioration of Macbeth's character. Over his first crime, he hesitated. Here, he shows no hesitation or remorse, even though he is now planning the death of his best friend. And he goes on with the soliloquy, where he says, Mark Antony's was by Caesar. So Macbeth compares the fact that he feels inferior to Banquo to the restraining influence that Caesar had over Mark Antony. Macbeth is jealous of Banquo and feels intimidated by him. Macbeth claims Banquo is the only person he fears. It's not true. Once Banquo is murdered, his focus will move to someone else, Macduff. And now he goes on about Banquo. He chid the sisters when first they put the name of king upon me and bade them to speak to him. Then prophet-like they hailed him father to a line of kings. So he says Banquo scolded the witches and commanded them to predict his future too. They then predicted that he will be the father of many future Scottish kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown. So his children, Macbeth's children, will not become king. And put a barren scepter in my gripe, thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand. So they put a sterile, empty scepter, a symbol of kingship, in his hand. And then it will be wrenched with an unlineal hand. It will be torn from his hand by someone that's not of his own family. No son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue I have filed my mind. So he says, if this is the truth, I have corrupted my mind and blackened my conscience, so that Banquo's children can become kings. So Macbeth cannot accept that he has given his soul to the devil just so that Banquo's children will one day rule Scotland. So we see here that Macbeth's crown has brought him no joy or fulfillment. Firstly, he tried to prove the truth of the witches' prophecies by murdering Duncan. Now he wishes to prove that they are liars by murdering Banquo and Fleance. He decides to challenge fate by changing this predicted outcome. So first, he tried to prove the truth of the prophecies by killing Duncan. Now he is trying to prove that the witches are liars by murdering Banquo and Fleance, and he decides to challenge fate by changing this predicted outcome. And the images of infertility used here emphasizes that Macbeth has no right to the crown, which is, in his case, metaphorical sterile. He is anyway currently childless. And then he goes on, he says, for them the gracious Duncan have I murdered, put rancors in the vessel of my peace. So he finds it impossible to live with the bitterness that festers in his mind. What he has done has completely destroyed his peace of mind. Only for them, that is still Banquo's children he's talking about, and mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man. He has given his eternal jewel, his immortal soul, to the common enemy of man, to the devil. He damned himself to hell so that Banquo's sons can become kings, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. Rather than so, come, fight into the list and champion me to the utterance. Now, this is here where he challenges fate. He says, the list was the tournament field where knights used to fight to death in single combat. So he says, into the list. So rather than letting Banquo's children be kings, Macbeth challenges fate to fight against him till death. So he's prepared to defy fate by refusing the witch's prophecy about Banquo. At that moment, the servant re-enter with the two murderers, and then he sends he asks the servant to guard the door until he calls him. Right. And then he's saying, was it not yesterday we spoke together? So they spoke yesterday, the previous day. So the above images might reflect deep regret for murdering Duncan, but Macbeth is determined it will not have been done for nothing, especially not merely for the benefit of Banquo's children. That is what he now said in the soliloquy that we have just read. And now he's talking to the murderers, and then he's asking them, have you considered of my speeches? So the previous day he spoke to them. So have you thought about what I told you? So it's obvious that the murder of Banquo is well planned. Macbeth has already begun to plot the murder of Banquo even before he invites Banquo to the banquet as the guest of honor, because he spoke to them the previous day. And then you will see where he says, now know that it was he in the times past which held you so under fortune. He's asking, do you realize it was Banquo and not I who was responsible for your misfortune? So Macbeth here lies to the murderers, okay? And these lies give them a personal motive to kill Banquo, hatred and desire for revenge. He also uses some of Lady Macbeth's tactics when he plays on their courage and their manhood. All right. And he goes on, he says, I prove beyond a doubt to you how you were tricked, hindered, or deceived by all means possible, still lying to them about Banquo. And then he goes on and he says, even an idiot or a madman would have realized that Banquo was the cause of your troubles, that it was Banquo who plotted your downfall. So now from what Macbeth says to the murderers, it seems that they are not common murderers. They seem to have been soldiers with some claim to a promotion which was set aside in a way that had deeply offended them. So they have thought that Macbeth has been responsible for depriving them of what was rightfully theirs. But at their first meeting, he has suggested or succeeded in diverting their suspicions from himself to Banquo. And he proceeds to urge them to take revenge. So he's lying to them about Banquo so that it would give them a personal motive to kill him. Right, and then he go on and he says, now the reason for our second meeting is to discover if they will be willing and brave enough to murder Banquo, or will they act like weaklings and forgive him? Okay, this is where Lady Macbeth's tactics comes in. And he goes on, is your patience so strong that you will let him get away with this? Are you such good Christians that you will pray for your enemy and his children? And again, to pray for this good man and for his issue. His issue is his children. So Macbeth is obsessed with Banquo's descendants. He's determined to have Fleance murdered too. And still he describes Banquo where he says Banquo had an oppressive hand, or he was a tyrannical man. So he oppressed them so heavily as to bring them to the brink of the grave. So whose heavy hand hath bowed you to the grave and beggared yours forever. It impoverished them and their children forever. And the first murderer answer, he say, we are men, my liege, suggests that no normal man would put up with this sort of treatment. They feel revengeful towards Banquo. And then Macbeth is describing, he's saying there are many types of men, as there are many types many breeds of dogs. Dogs are dogs, but some have special qualities that separate them according to class or quality. And it's the same with men. So the list that he's naming here, which dogs have, shows that dogs have the best, which dogs have the best qualities and are most valuable. And then he suggests that if they are exceptional men, they will kill Banquo. And then he is just listing all the dogs according to the gifts that nature has given him. And he's talking about their individual qualities and characteristics as distinct from the catalogue in which they are listed simply as dogs. And he goes on and he said, not of the most inferior class of man, if they belong to the worst rank of manhood, they will not be brave enough to kill Banquo. All right, so he's talking here about if you look at the previous one, if they were exceptional men, they will kill Banquo. And then if he tell them of an enterprise to be kept secret, he says, this is important. I will put that business in your bosoms, whose execution takes your enemy off. So he's saying to them, it must be kept a secret. If they carry it out, it will eliminate their enemy. And at the same time, it will ensure them the lasting gratitude of their king. And then he tells them, Macbeth is troubled with uncertainties while Banquo lives. He would be perfectly secure, safe, happy, and forever grateful if Banquo were dead. So he says he would be completely safe and happy if Banquo were dead. But this is not true. We said that a while ago. As he feels threatened by the existence of Fleance too, and is planning his murder as well. But he has yet to tell them this. Right, and then the second murderer answers him, I have suffered so many disasters and misfortunes that I am filled with anger and hate. I do not care and will do anything to avenge myself on the world. And then the first one answered, I'm so worn out and dragged around by bad luck that he is prepared to take any risk to better his life or to end his life for once and for all. All right, and then Macbeth says, no, Banquo was your enemy. And he continues and he says, so is he mine, and in such bloody distance. So Macbeth compares Banquo's very existence with the point of a sword piercing his vital organs. He says that every minute of his being thrusts against my nearest of life. So the point of the sword piercing his vital organs. So Banquo's existence threatens Macbeth's life. Right, and he uses the words bloody distance. It's an image from fencing. It describes the space between the two swordsmen. Banquo is close enough to Macbeth to harm or kill him. So the word distance also suggests the distrust that now exists between them. Right, and then he says, and though I could with barefaced power sweep him from my sight, I could easily eliminate Banquo using my power as king and bid my will avouch it and explaining that it was my will as king to do so. Yet I must not, for certain friends that are both in his and mine, whose loves I may not drop. So he dare not do so because of mutual friends whose loyalty and support he cannot afford to lose by killing Banquo openly. And he says, but while he's full, who I myself struck down. So however, Macbeth must mourn Banquo's death, although he was the one who ordered it. Deception. All right, and then he says, it's for this reason that I need your help. Okay, and in concealing his role in the murder from the public for several important reasons. So Macbeth is extending his unking-like evil by deceiving gullible people to murder on his behalf. He deceived those people by telling them that Banquo was responsible for all the misfortune that happened to them, and they must take revenge. Just as the witches and his wife tempted him into murder through his ambition, so does he tempt the murderers into ruthless and unreasonable killing by exploiting their frustrations of an unhappy and unfulfilled existence. Right, now the theme of growing evil is evident in the fact that Macbeth, once tempted, is now the tempter. He no longer listens to evil, he now initiates it. He does not need Lady Macbeth to push or to prod or to entice him into murder anymore. So she is no longer his spur like she was for the murder of Duncan. All right, and they answer me, we shall, my lord, perform what you command us, though our lives. Now he interrupts them. So it's not clear what the murderer wanted to say because Macbeth interrupts him and prevents him from finishing his sentence. And he says, your spirits shine through you. You are brave, reliable, and trustworthy men. Within this hour at most, I will advise you where to plant yourselves, acquaint you with the perfect spy of the time, the moment on it, for it must be done tonight. So I will advise you the best place to hide yourself, to kill Banquo, to commit the murder, and Macbeth will let them know when is the best time to commit the murder. It has to be done that very night. All right, and then he says it must be done some distance from the palace. And you should always keep in mind that no suspicion should fall on Macbeth. Right, and then he goes on to avoid any imperfection or clumsiness. To ensure success, they must kill Fleance too. His death is just as important to Macbeth as Banquo's is. He says here, Fleance, his son, that keeps him company, whose absence is no less material to me than his father's, must embrace the fate of that dark hour. So Fleance must undergo the same fate as his father. He must be killed at the same time. So he says, resolve yourselves apart. So he gives them time to make up their minds on whether they will kill Fleance too, because the murder of a child is not something anybody would be willing to carry out. I'll come to you anon. And both the murderers said, we are resolved, my lord. And then he says, I'll call upon you immediately, wait outside. And then he says, it is concluded. So Macbeth is satisfied. The matter of Banquo's death has been settled or resolved. He does not, like in Duncan's case, consider the consequence of the murder. He says, Banquo, thy soul's flight, if it find heaven, must find it out tonight. If Banquo's soul is to go to heaven, it must do so that night. Right, this concludes Act 3, Scene 1 and our lesson for today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I will see you all again tomorrow when we continue with Act 3, Scene 2. Have a great afternoon. Make wise choices. Goodbye.